announcements before we begin presentation? No? Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Kloss. Today is our second budget study session. There are some handouts in the front with all of the slides from the presentation, and you can visit our website and get all of the most recent information on the budget there as well. Here's our agenda for this evening. We're going to review a little bit more about what we know of the executive budget, the governor's budget that was released in late January. Based on the governor's budget, which really at this point has non-existent numbers in it, we're making a couple of assumptions and estimates, and we have created some new information that we normally would give at the second meeting. Projections of enrollment for the school district by building. We're also going to update expenses and revenues on the budget that we originally had proposed to the board and the community in January. We will have an estimated tax cap number, and we'll get into speaking a little bit more about that when we get to that particular portion of the proposal. And we also have some detail on the administratively proposed transportation bond that we'd like to put out in this particular year's budget. So, we're going to start with an overview and some new information on the governor's budget. The governor's budget is unusual because it is contingent. It is tied to two things: a series of education reforms that the governor would like done, all in his own way, and secondly, it's tied to a series of ethics reforms that the governor would also like done. If the legislature passes the reforms that the governor has put forward in their entirety, then the governor proposes a little bit over a $1 billion increase in school aid. There is no formula changes proposed in this particular budget, and there's no state aid run or distribution of how the $1.013 billion would be released to school districts. Normally, and in every other year, and certainly in the 35 years that I've been doing this, the governor has released a budget that had a number with a released school aid given to districts so that they could use that as a baseline for constructing budgets. This year, the governor gave a number without a release of that particular distribution. So, in our estimates, we're going to count on what we believe is the absolute bare minimum that the governor can give. I think it's highly unlikely that the legislature will pass all of the governor's reforms by the time the Board of Education has to adopt a budget on April 13th. If reform legislation is not enacted according to the governor, then in his budgetary language and in the actual legal document, no district would receive any increase over the base year of 2014-15. The current law formulas would remain in effect, but there's no mechanism to distribute even what we call expense-driven aids. Aids that we receive money from the state based on how much we spent the previous year. For example, transportation is an expense-driven aid. Special education is an expense-driven aid. BOCES is an expense-driven aid. We're not sure that we would even get those expense-driven aids if the legislature does not pass the governor's mandated reforms. So this is my point to editorialize and say that these are my words and not necessarily the Board of Education. The governor is highly irresponsible with releasing a budget with no state aid limits. It makes it almost impossible for us to have the democratic process of presenting the budget truthfully and accurately to our community and getting feedback. So we are going to count on what we believe is the absolute bare minimum and hope that this issue is resolved before the board actually adopts the 2015-16 budget. The actual language in the governor's proposal establishes that no district receives an aid increase if his reforms are not enacted. And it's not just the education reforms, it's also the ethics reforms that are in the governor's proposal. We really need these baseline estimates to comply, especially with calculating our property tax cap. We have an estimated property tax cap, and we think we're going to be very close to what the actual number is. But in order for us to give you a precise 100% accurate number, we need state aid runs from the governor, even if those state aid runs said there was a zero increase. Once the tax levy is approved by the voters, it cannot be increased. And what I mean by this is once the tax levy is approved by the board on April 13th, and then it goes to the community and the community votes on it in May, we cannot change the tax levy from that point forward. It's not like the old days where the levy could change all the way up until the rate was established in August. So guessing is not a good thing for us. It's not a good thing for the school district. It's not a good thing for any of the schools within New York State. Without solid state aid numbers, this process is less transparent and democratic than it could be. And I blame the governor for that because this is something that he easily could have done. Even if the governor gets his own way and the legislature actually passes all of his reforms prior to the time that the school board adopts a budget, the amount that he has in there of $1 billion is actually inadequate for Clarence and other school districts. State aid to Clarence is 15% lower than it was in 2008-2009. For many school districts in Erie County and across the state, this is the reality. Last year, the gap elimination adjustment, the amount of money that was due to Clarence, but was taken back in the formula as a way to balance the state budget, was $2.8 million. Clarence, because of the property wealth within our district, has had a larger GEA imposed over the past 5 years and less of the GEA restored than almost any district in Erie County. The only ones that would be close to us would be Williamsville, East Aurora, and Orchard Park. So we have been hurt by the gap elimination adjustment more so than some more state aid dependent districts like the city of Buffalo. The governor proposed $1 billion. The state Senate, Republican-led state Senate, is proposing a minimum start point of $1.1 billion. The Educational Conference Board, which is made up of lobby groups from all of the major educational players in New York State, have estimated that it's going to cost at least $1.9 billion just to get schools back to the 2008 level of state funding. So even if we're lucky enough to have the governor get his reforms through, his numbers really are not adequate for Clarence. The current law under expense-driven aid, dollars that we spent the year before and get aided on in this year, would estimate to a little over $309 million. Building aid is the largest portion of that. Our community has already voted on projects for building aid. We are guaranteed to get that particular money. So I don't know exactly how this is going to work out, Greg, but that one is by law. 142 million of the 309 million goes to school districts across the state for building projects. Transportation aid, private excess costs, that's special education, BOCES, high-cost special education, charter school transition. Those are the other aids that we think would come through by law, even if the governor does not get his reforms spent. So that's what we built in to our numbers. The governor has 5 proposed education reforms. This is the summary of them. His first proposal would take a tenure period for teachers from the current 3 years to receive tenure to a 5-year probationary appointment. Included in that would be effective or highly effective evaluations for 5 consecutive years. The governor is saying in his proposal, the poorest performing 5% of the school districts would be considered failing across New York State, and the governor would like to kick out the Board of Education, kick out the superintendent, and appoint something called a receiver to oversee those failing districts. There are actually there are 700 school districts in New York State approximately, a little under that. 2% have failing schools. The rest, like Clarence, are not even close to having failing schools. Another proposal by the governor, the procedure for dismissing a teacher would be conducted by a single hearing officer rather than a multiple panel, and 2 consecutive ineffective ratings would remove a teacher from their position. The governor also wants to raise the charter school cap by 100, and the biggest, most egregious, most difficult educational reform is he wants to completely change the entire teacher evaluation system that the governor just put forward himself 2 years ago. This is a very difficult task to pass all of this legislation, even if the Senate and the Assembly had an entire year to consider it. With only a month or a month and a half to consider it, I don't see any way how all these reforms can be finalized. So in essence, I believe, the governor is holding money for schools hostage to a reform movement that should go through a normal legislative process. The governor puts in an additional property tax relief plan in his budget. This is in addition to the tax capped levy. The governor is proposing to eventually phase out STAR and replace it with a property tax relief credit. These are the details that we know at this point. STAR would be capped this year at 2014-15 benefit. Almost everyone within Clarence receives a STAR benefit. The governor would cap that. He would then close STAR to any new beneficiaries and transition to this new concept of the property tax relief credit. So if you had purchased a new house, you would be out of luck on STAR for this year. The property tax relief credit works in phases. In the first phase of the governor's proposal in 2015, if you paid greater than 3.25% of your income in school property taxes, and your district stayed within the tax cap, you could receive a rebate or a tax credit as a result. Now, one of the things about Clarence is our tax rate is relatively low. It would be unusual for someone to pay greater than 3.75% of their income, but not impossible in property taxes. That would be in 2015. In 2016 and thereafter, STAR would eventually begin to be phased out, the property tax relief credit would be phased in, and taxpayers who paid greater than 6% of their income in total property taxes, and your school district and the town that you live in both stayed under the tax cap, then homeowners would receive a property tax relief credit. The percentage of pet taxes paid in excess of the threshold would vary. The maximum credit would be $2,000 for a homeowner, and the minimum credit would be a couple of bucks. This would highly benefit people who live in areas where the assessed value of their home is very high and they don't make a lot of money in terms of their personal income. It wouldn't necessarily affect Clarence all that much. You would be hard pressed, even in a home in Clarence that's a very expensive home, to pay greater than 6% of your total income in property taxes. So this is more of a downstate proposal to provide tax relief for people in those very high expense cost of living areas than it is for something that would benefit upstate. However, any property tax relief is a good thing. So those are the governor's proposals, and that's where things stand, and we haven't heard anything since. I'd just like to take this opportunity to publicly thank our 2 legislators, Jane Corwin and Mike Ratzenhofer. I had the opportunity to meet with them, and I know Elizabeth and the Teachers Association has also met with them, and some board members have met with them. They are arguing for us in terms of getting a state aid run from the governor. That's the very first thing. And both of our legislators have written letters in that regard, and I want to publicly thank them for that. Plus, they have both signed their names to a piece of legislation that would completely eliminate the gap elimination adjustment in this particular fiscal budget year. So they are helping us. The governor, not so much. So how does this affect the 2015-16 budget? Usually this is the time when we present the community with an update on our enrollment projections. We're going to start with the district. This year we have a little over 4,600 kids in the district, and we anticipate some slow dropping in enrollment as time goes on over the next 5 years. The large majority of the drop will end up in the next 5 years to be at the middle school level. Here's how it translates. This is elementary enrollment. Elementary enrollment has dropped for the past 5 years. According to our projections, which are highly accurate, we use 2 projection technologies. It will begin to stabilize in 2018-19 and then make a slight uptick. So our elementary enrollment is going to hover. Now it's a little over 1,900 kids. Next year it's going to be lower, but it is going to hover in that 1,800 range once we hit the 5-year mark. One thing that happened in our enrollment this year is our incoming kindergarten is larger than our current kindergarten and our current first grade. So it looks like we've turned the corner in terms of the elementary schools on enrollment. What we do for staffing predictions at the elementary school, if we keep the total number of staff the same, and we extrapolate the enrollment as an entire district, not by building, this is what the class size averages would look like. They would hover from 20 to 23. Now, it never turns out to be this neat and clean in a particular building. In a particular building, there's usually a bubble in one place or another where enrollment could be as high as 25 or 26 kids. And in some rare instances, at Sheridan Hill this year, we actually have a class size of 27 or 28 in one of the, is that yours also?
Yeah, Clarence Center.
Clarence Center also has 27, 28 kids in Michelle's class there. So when you extrapolate it over the entire district, our class sizes are within the range of what the Board of Education would consider to be adequate. When you go building by building, it's a little bit different. So even though we're experiencing some slight enrollment decline, it does not translate into reduction of teachers. We believe we've done too much reduction of teachers in the past 5 years with some of our budget issues, so therefore we're not making any recommendations in that regard. The place where it will start to catch up now, because it's through kind of kindergarten, first, second grade at the elementaries, the enrollment drop will now start to catch up at the middle school. And this year we have a little under 1,200 kids at our middle school. We're going to have a little drop next year, and then it will continue to drop to about 1,000 kids 5 years from now. And that would still be an above average size middle school in Western New York. At the high school level, we'll also see a drop. We have a little under 1,600 kids now at our high school. We should hover around 1,400 after 5 years. And again, that's a smallish drop. We often get student transfers from private schools when we go from grade 8 to grade 9. Our high school numbers are not as predictable as the others. But our enrollment is actually dropping slightly, but starting to stabilize and in better shape than we've been in the past couple of years. And that's good news for us. When we put together the proposed budget for the board provides us with some goals. And one of the goals is we will stay at the level of the tax cap. We will not present a budget to the board or the community that exceeds the tax cap. And the second goal is we want to maintain all existing programs with no staff reductions. We'd actually like to bring some positions back, but without any solid numbers from the governor, it's impossible for us to do that. We have a budget that meets these two goals that we're going to present to the board and the community tonight. We will be at the level of the tax cap, and we will maintain all existing programs without any staff reductions. If we can somehow get some additional state aid, and remember, we're only counting on the very bare minimum of state aid. But if the governor or our legislators can come through prior to the time that the board adopts the budget and we get state aid, then the board is going to have to make some decisions about what to do with any additional dollars that we may get. The capped tax levy will not provide enough funds to restore personnel and programs in the 2015-16 budget. Some assumptions that we made in the 2015-16 budget on the expense and the revenue side, just so that you know some things that are going up and some things that are going down. As we said before, and this is a priority, the budget that we provide will be at the level of the cap. We have an estimated cap number. We believe we're very close, but we can't give you the 100% solid, no questions asked number until we get a state aid run from the governor. We don't have any budget reductions in this proposed budget at all. We have some increase in Medicare revenue. We get Medicare revenue from the state for those students who qualify in special education. We did have a cost decrease in this particular budget, and that is the pension system for teachers and administrators. It went down this year instead of going up like it has for the past 8 or 9 years. Our debt service increases by $800,000 for refinancing and new issues, most of which is offset by state aid. And in the refinancing of the debt we did last fall, we saved at least $4.5 million. Am I correct there, Mr. Mancuso?
Right, over the length of the
issue. So taking advantage of the low interest rates was something that we did, and it was a great move. Buildings and grounds and transportation, we've been trying to hold the line there for many, many years. We have to increase their overall expenditures by 2%. They have not had an increase in at least 4 or 5 years. Our healthcare expenses increased by 5%, although that may sound like a lot. It is actually well underneath what the community rate is for those employers who are not self-funded like we are. We self-funded 3 years ago. Our rate increases have hovered in the 4 to 6% range. The community is in the 10 to 13% range. So that was a great, smart move made by the board, and Dr. McCack manages that. We think we can get a combination of state aid, the little amount that we would get, plus miscellaneous revenue to stay within the tax cap for 2015-16. And we are recommending another bus purchase, which we're going to get into a little detail, and we have John Meyer here, our transportation supervisor, and answer questions. So, some more detail on revenue and expenditures, more detail than we gave you the last time. On the revenue side of the budget, at the level of the tax cap as we have it currently calculated, we think we can get a little over $2 million for this particular budget. We are holding the line on the other revenue because we don't believe they will increase in the 2015-16 year. State aid and Medicaid we have coming in at a little over $300,000. About $250,000 of which is what we believe the state aid minimal increase would be. And again, we're guessing, and about $50,000 for additional Medicaid. We appropriate currently $1.85 million from our reserves into the 2014-15 budget as a revenue, and we will do that again next year, but we don't think increasing the appropriated fund balance is a fiscally smart move. We think we're right on the exact number where we need to be. So our total year-over-year budget increase is 3.2% in spending. That translates to an estimated tax rate of $15.51 per thousand. We'll get into a little bit about what that means. These are the big expense items. We're not listing every expense item. We will have on our website a line item budget that will be posted after the board sees theirs today. And if you can go line by line there for everything from one year to the next to see how the increases were. These were the big increases. Instructional wages, $940,000. Our debt service up, again, healthcare, non-instructional wages, utilities, supplies, equipment, OCs, and Social Security. These are the big ticket items. A little bit less than they've been in the past, well within meeting the cap number. This particular graphic, which is difficult to decipher, provides you with the state calculation for the tax levy cap. There are a number of factors that go into the calculation. We follow it to the letter in order to determine what the tax levy cap should be. There's a base formula, and then added to that base formula are exclusions that are necessary by the law. So, when you take that formula and you plug it in with all of the numbers that we have as estimates, this is the exact number by number function of how we would calculate the tax cap. You start with the current tax year's levy, you multiply it by the growth factor for the tax base, and that's predominantly in the town of Clarence, correct, Rick? You then add to it the current year's payment in lieu of taxes. There are still some commercial businesses that have payments in lieu of taxes rather than the actual tax rate applied to their overall assessed value. You subtract the capital tax levy from the current year, and that gives you the adjusted current year levy. You add to that, you multiply to that the allowable growth factor. The growth factor can be as high as 2. This is where people get the idea that the levy cap is 2%. This is the number that's provided by the state based on the cost of living increases over the course of the year. It was not 2, it was 1.62%. We estimate, we subtract from that next year's payment in lieu of taxes, add any prior cap carryover. If we had been below the tax cap in a previous year, we're allowed to use that, the number that we were below, to add to the cap in the next year. And that gives us a tax levy limit of $42.5 million. Then we would add to that the exemptions. Any court orders or judgments against the school district, there are none. We are allowed to add the capital tax levy for the budget year, because this has already been voted on by our community. This debt, in terms of capital improvement, has been voted on by our community. Therefore, in the calculation, it's mandatory to put it in. If pension had gone up greater than 2 basis points, we could put the amount greater than 2 basis points there. It did not go up, it went down, so that's a 0. The total exclusion, 1.9 million. Add that to the limit. The maximum limit, the maximum levy after exemptions is 44.4 million. The 2015-16 tax levy limit rate for Clarence is a little over $2 million. What does that translate to? 4.78%. That is the tax cap levy limit, precisely. These are the debt that equated to the $1.9 million on the exemption. We had a project in 2002. 2012 was the refinancing of that. We had a project in 2004 with a 2015 refi. And we had a project in 2008. That debt will come off in the 2020s. This is necessary under the law to add to the level of the cap. So what's the difference between a tax levy and the tax rate? The levy is the amount of money that the school district raises via property taxes in the school budget. The levy is determined by subtracting the total spending number in the budget from all other sources of revenue. The rate is how you translate that levy into a dollar per thousand number that's needed to raise the total tax levy. Because we have 100% valuation in all the towns that make up the Clarence School District, there's no need for an equalization rate, and the tax rate is very simple. You divide the total assessed value of the town by the total tax levy to be raised, and you get a number. And the number is a number per thousand. It's then applied to everyone's home based on their assessed value, and that's how the levy is garnered. I'm sorry, the rate. So what does this all look like on a regular person's house? Well, we gave you 3 different homes in Clarence. A home valued at $100,000, a home valued at $200,000 and a home valued at $300,000. We gave you the capped tax levy two different ways, the annual cost and the monthly cost. If you have a $100,000 home, the tax capped levy at 4.7% is a $71 increase, or $5.92 per month. If you have a $200,000 home, it's a $142 increase, or a little under $12 per month. If you have a $300,000 home, it's a $213 increase, or a little under $18 per month. But what you need to remember is, Clarence met the standard for the governor's proposal last year on tax rebate. We had to save at least 1% of our levy in savings. We did so. We have proven it to New York State. Therefore, everyone in Clarence will get a rebate on the increase in their 2015-16 taxes. Whatever you paid additional, you will get rebated. Now, for me last year, that was about 47 bucks. I don't know what it was for everybody, but every dollar will be rebated. So even though our tax cap number is higher, the rebate kicks in because we qualify for it. How do you qualify for it? Well, number one, your budget has to stay within the property tax cap. We did that. I think it's worth noting, we've stayed within the property tax cap every year. We did try to exceed it once, voted down, we brought back a budget at the level of the cap. Plus, the school district had to put forward a compliant efficiency plan that saved 1% of the tax levy in each of the following 3 years. We did that easily. We did it actually in conjunction and collaboration with BOCES. So, we gave them our efficiency plan, it's been approved. One more time, all taxpayers in Clarence will get a rebate on the increase in their 2015-16 taxes. So what is the net cost of the increase next year? It is zero. So let me summarize. Our total budget for 2014-15 is $72.5 million. We're going to get a little more than $2 million in the tax levy increase, a little over $300,000 in other revenues. Our total 15-16 proposed budget, $74.9 million. That's a year-over-year spending increase of a little over 3%. That's the summary of our entire budget. Last thing, before we take any questions that the community might have. We think it is financially, fiscally, good policy to have a bus renewal program. If we do this for 5 straight years, the actual cost on the levy becomes zero. Debt falls off, new debt comes on, we keep buying buses, and we're in great shape. We've done it for 2 years, we're ready to enter the 3rd year. If we keep going for 5 years, we can have a level debt service on buses, and we can always have someplace in the neighborhood of 12 to 13 buses a year, John, something in that range. So what are we recommending for next year? 3 72-passenger buses, actually 5 72-passenger buses. One of them costs a little bit more. Why is that, John?
They have luggage compartments.
Famous luggage compartment, thank you. 2 wheelchair vans, 5 30-passenger vans, and 1 pickup truck with a plow, because we just about plowed ourselves out this year. So the total cost is a little over $1 million. However, John will work his magic and get trade-ins on some of our very old buses that no one would want to buy, but somebody does in a different country. We'll get about $19,000 back from that. The total purchase price, about $982,000. Put in the borrowing costs, $990,000, the exact same amount that we asked for last year. This would put us in the 3rd year of the bus proposal. 2 more years to go, and we could have it be completely flat. Some facts. What would this purchase cost the local taxpayer? Well, we borrow the money over 5 years. In 2015-16, this purchase doesn't cost anything because we actually borrow the money during the next school year. So the cost to the taxpayers for this particular purchase starts kicking in 2016-17. In the first year, it's a little under $5,000 locally. That is a negligible amount on the tax on a home. It's really a cent or two. In 2017-18 through 2020, it's about $3.60 on an average home to make this bus purchase. And again, if we do this for 5 consecutive years and keep doing it, that number actually reduces to a zero debt load. You can see the local share as a percentage of the tax levy and the cost, the actual cost of the bus for the local share, and the approximate cost on a $200,000 home. Why should we get a fleet replacement plan? We think it's cost effective, it's predictable, and it's a sound way to budget. It saves us money in the long run, and it makes sure that we have safe buses. The replacement plan allows for newer, safer, greener equipment, and we are under emissions law to make sure that the new things that we purchase are greener. We can have a more predictable equipment cost and reduced parts inventory and repair cost as well. At what point does the maintenance of a bus exceed its value? We've had a lot of discussion on this over the years. I'm not the expert, John is the expert, but someplace between 9 and 11 years, bus bodies begin to deteriorate both superficially and structurally. And it becomes expensive for us to make repairs to those buses. Engines and transmissions, someplace between 110 and 140,000 miles. That's about a 10-year turnaround, which is what we're proposing. Here is our current fleet, a little under 100 buses, 62 of which have a 12-year life expectancy. If we make these purchases for the next 10 years, we will have replaced the entire fleet. We will be able to do it really cost neutral if we can keep doing bus propositions every year. You can take a look at how we've done bus propositions since 2004. We were on a cycle where we had everything going very nicely. Every year we put up a little under $1 million for bus purchases. We had already hit the 5-year point. We were paying one debt off while another debt came off. And then in 2009, we didn't buy buses. That put us behind a year. And in 2010, we bought a little bit less than what we needed. And in 2011, we didn't buy buses again. And in 2013, we didn't buy buses again. So we got off track on that renewable bus proposition plan. Again, on the right-hand side, it kind of goes through some of the things that we've already talked about why we recommend to the board that this is a preferable option. Again, we've got John here tonight to answer questions better than me. So that provides you with an overview of the 2015-16 budget. And normally at this point, Mrs. Kloss, we would ask for any questions from the community. So we'll open it up.
What you're saying on the buses here is it'll be $1 million. Will that increase the cap that you'll be able to go to?
Mr. Mancuso.
No.
It won't. Well, I thought I understood when I read in the budget, governor's budget, that if you increase the funding for the buses, that's added on to what you're able to produce under the cap.
Capital and bus purchase propositions aren't subject to the cap in the year that you're voting on. So what happens is, as you see the debt service, portion of the budget, that is naturally subject to the cap. And that's part of our cap calculation. As you see those exclusions for all the debt that we've already voted on, that's part of it. And each year, as buses go into it, they go into that portion of the budget.
But that'll be put into the future.
No, it's actually Mr. Murphy was making, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's built in the future.
So it may not be in this year's, but it will be built into the future.
That's what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. Yes. It will be built in,
It'll be built into those exclusions that Dr. Hicks showed you.
yes.
Yes.
All right. Okay, thank you. What do you want to know?
I think when we hear tax cap, most people think of 2%. And you can say we're going to meet the tax cap. However, your tax cap is 4.5% estimated. That can still go up some more. So what expenditures exactly are added to that 2% that is making it 4.5%?
Mr. Mancuso, can you explain? I'll go back to that slide. You can-
Yes. So the slide that Dr. Hicks will go to shows you the 2% is a number that is very misleading. 2% is just one of several components of the budget, of the cap, I'm sorry, that can go up as high as 2%. This year, that component is 1.62%. There's also a town growth factor. This year, it's 1.5%. That is a number that New York State gives us as far as growth in our school district. So the 1.5% is a portion of that calculation, right up at the top. And then as you come down, you have to take your pilot agreements, you add them back and forth, so there's gonna be a plus or a minus for those. And then the 1.62 is the number the state came up with where people refer to 2%. So 2%, that number is only a small portion of the cap. There's that 1.5% up top, there's the 1.62, and then the 1.9 million are the exclusions for all the capital projects and buses that the community has already approved. So the 3 capital projects that Dr. Hicks showed on the other slide, plus the capital project that was just approved this past year, that debt service, the community has already said, okay, spend that debt service, so that gets added to the cap.
So it was basically what we voted on, or what was passed last November, that is making the 4.5% instead of the 2%?
I answer it a different way. I would say capital projects that were voted on as far back as 1998 have somewhat of an impact. The growth factor for the town of Clarence has an impact. And this calculation is exactly what's used by every school district in the state. We're not trying to fudge a number in any way. 2 things I think are worth noting. Number one, we have many capital improvements that were needed by our school district, and it's only right that that become an exclusion to the cap. That's the way the law was written. Number 2, everyone gets a rebate this year. The net amount of money that you would have to pay in school taxes should be a 0% increase because we stayed within this cap.
In other words, on a $200,000 home, we would roughly be getting a rebate of the $150 that would be normally be our increase?
Correct.
Yes.
You only got $47.
Last year, the increase wasn't that
It
large.
wasn't as high. Last year, the rebate wasn't as high as what it'll be this year. Last year, our cap number was 3.2.
Right.
If I could ask one more thing, normally, what was voted on, the repairs that were voted on last November, are normally put into the final budget. Why were they voted on separately instead of, as in previous years, put in the final budget?
Capital projects have never been put into the final budget. All those projects listed on there from 1998, 2004, 2008, all of them have been separate votes. That's the way they have to be. Whether they're held the day of the May vote or not, they have to be completely separate. They're not part of the general fund budget.
And the timing of why we presented the budget, the capital project vote, has more to do with when we get approval, putting out bids, and being able to hit the construction season than it did with putting it in at the same time as we vote on the rest of the budget. We would have lost an entire construction season if we would have waited until May to put that vote on. We've never, I don't think, coupled those particular things. And there's nothing untoward about that whatsoever. That's what school districts do.
In subsequent years, the debt service evens out as far as cap numbers. What that means is if you take the $1.9 million, that's the exclusion for this year, and you do the formula next year, that $1.9 million goes up to where the $1.2 million is. And then the current year will be closer to the $1.9 million. So there's not that little bit of a jump. So right now, the $700 and some $1,000 difference is what's making the cap this year a little bit higher than what might be a typical year. Part of it also has to do is, we were mentioning with the bus purchases, as you stabilize them and get them even, you don't have fluctuations in the cap.
So it's not a good assumption to say that next year's cap will be at 4.7%.
That's what I'm just gonna ask you.
It will not.
It'll be less
It'll be
or
lower.
more.
It'll likely be less.
Here, I don't want to take up every question. I can think of another one.
Any other questions?
I have a big mouth, I can speak loud enough probably for everyone to hear. First of all, I want to say thank you for including no additional cuts, and I encourage the board to consider that. We're already dealing, just in the one elementary school that my kids go to, half-time librarian, half-time gym teacher. I would love to see additional teachers brought back, and staff, and programs brought back, but I guess one step at a time. Additionally, the point of the 0% net increase is kind of a no-brainer. I mean, I don't even understand. I hope that there's no opposition to this because it's zero. There's no increase. So I really see the problem with the governor and the GEA, and I would encourage everyone to use their time and their advocacy efforts. I know the district has advocacy letters online. Sign your name to the letters and please send them in. Put your name behind what really is the problem here. It's not what we're spending, it's that the state isn't giving us the money that's due to us.
Thank you. Any other questions from the community? Mr. Murphy?
I'd like to ask the bus superintendent, how many buses do we have that are over 10 years old?
I can't give you the answer right now.
Do we have any over 10 years old?
Yes,
How many? Would you know that off?
I can get you that answer.
Okay. So we're replacing 5 buses, and we don't even know the age of all.
Well, we do, we just don't have it at our fingertips right now.
I see.
We will put on our website a fleet spreadsheet that has the age of our buses. We just don't have it at our fingertips right
I'm asking this question because you say that there won't be any tax increase next, cap increase, I should say. You have a lawsuit that's possibly going to be filed. That will be taken into account with the tax, with the cap, right?
The district currently does not have any pending.
I know we don't have any.
Doesn't have any pending legislation or prospective legislation that isn't covered by insurance.
You have insurance?
Yes.
That was my next question. Okay, thank you.
now. You're really natural.
Can I just ask one more question? Have you considered outsourcing your transportation?
Yes. Actually, we did a study on it 2 years ago. And we brought our recommendations to the board. And it's our belief that we have better service at a better price by having our own transportation.
You actually have studied it, we published it?
Yes, we did a major study years ago. We updated it, I think it was 2 years ago with the board during the budget process.
Have you checked with any other schools that are doing it?
As part of our process for looking into it, we have.
Just an idea.
And one of the other things is transportation is also heavily aided. So when you see a number that we're spending $2 or $3 million on transportation, we're getting 3/4 of that back every year from New York State. So it's very, very difficult for private carriers to compete with that.
I like this bus proposition. The state would be paying 70% of that.
They're gonna pay
Yeah.
73% of each dollar that we spend, both principal and interest.
When do they pay that?
They give it to us over the life of the borrow.
Oh, they give it to you in payments.
As we make the payments
I
that
see.
year, then we get the complement.
Yes, ma'am.
My question was, you said that after the study, it was found that it was cheaper to have the bus transportation done in-house, I'll say it. than in
I'll
school.
say it was more efficient.
More efficient. More efficient dollar-wise?
More efficient from a customer service point of view and relatively equitable dollar. It's like,
Okay, my question was, when you say that, I always think of this because it's not true in the private industry, that the costs of employees linger on until they die, they and their families. So did the study take into account the pension costs of the employees involved?
yes, we do not pay in retirement benefits for our bus drivers.
So, they're in the state pension system, but, a lot of things are controllable costs. Our bus drivers don't get full-blown health coverage costs, things like that. Our contract with the service employees is not a contract that has built-in increases. So they're costs that we can control. One of the things that came out of that initial study years ago and then updated was that we very efficiently take care of our fleet, maintain the bus fleet with our mechanics. And we do a great job there. We have a very, very low mechanic-to-bus ratio. I forgot exactly what it is, but, industry standard might be,
They used to call for 10 to 1, but
and
we're
we're probably,
16, 17.
we're probably 15, 16 to 1.
Okay, well, I still have to continue my question, and that is, I remember a few years ago when the economy really hit the bottom, and therefore, I may be saying it incorrectly, the investments that paid for pensions also took a nosedive, and therefore Clarence, as other municipalities, had to pay additional funds that were not originally expected to cover the costs that the investments did not make. So therefore, that could be the way it could fit us. Is that correct? Again?
Go ahead, John.
If I could add to the pensions on school bus drivers, most of the drivers that we hire today are retired from other jobs. Most of them don't even get into the New York retirement system at this point. The new tier system, they have to work 10 years before they can collect. So most of our drivers, again, are retired. They won't be working for us for a 10-year period. So the retirement costs are not that high for school bus drivers.
And you're correct, for 7 to 8 years, the pension costs increased. In some years, radically increased. This year, they did not increase, they went down.
Okay. May I just ask another quick
Sure.
question? I think it will be easy. You mentioned how our local legislators, Corbin and Nancy Hopper, you praised them, you thanked them.
Yes.
Have we found out from them whether they think the education reform legislation will pass?
Yeah, it's a tough call. They, right now, they're of the opinion that it would be very difficult for all of it to happen and still have an on-time budget. And from our perspective, the legislation that the governor wants should be separate from the proper funding for school districts. You can't say you have $1 billion, but I'm not gonna give it to you unless I get my own way. I mean, that would sound something more like what a fourth grader would do for us. What we want is bring the number for the proposed education aid, let us have it, then work on whatever the legislative reforms are that you need. There's a process for that. Our legislators don't agree with all the reforms, and they agree with bringing back the elimination of the GPA.
Oh, okay, I don't want to get into that, but I just wanted to know if they thought they would pass, and you were saying
They
if
think
the
it's,
budget was not on time, is that?
they think it's difficult to do that by the time this board votes on a
Do
budget.
the reforms have to be, I'll say, passed by the time budget is normally due April 1st, I guess it is.
And that's a great question. For our purposes, the best timing is prior to April 13th, because then this board knows exactly how much revenue is coming in from the state, and they can make informed decisions about what to do with it in the budget. So for us, it's definitively better for it to happen by April 13th.
I don't want to August, so.
Any other questions?
If you do get it, is that gonna mean that the tax cap will go down? Or
It
is it gonna
could.
be extra?
The Board of Ed would have to make a decision on what to do with any additional revenue above and beyond our estimates that we have here. It could bring positions back. It could be used to reduce the overall tax levy. We've said, though, that our recommendation is the cap. The cap is there for a reason. The cap is calculated for a purpose. We think the cap provides us with psychologically and from a fiscal perspective what we need to continue to run the district. Yes, sir.
To tag on with that, then, if the board were to decide to lower the tax levy with additional funds, does that hurt us the following year? With respect to the tax cap levy, would it be based on the lower amount?
Yes. But one thing that you're allowed in this funny thing, the second, in that first chunk, the second from the last, it says available prior cap carryover. We would be allowed to, if our cap was 4.7 this year, but we really had it at 4, we would be allowed to take that 0.7% and put it into that calculation next year.
So it might just balance out.
It might, it's hard to say. For us, we've worked hard at a rationale that says we will not exceed the cap. Now, the cap is the cap is the cap. We don't make it up, we just plug the numbers in. Yes, sir.
I just want to bring up one thing on you said about you got $47 last year. Most of us in Rock Oak have gotten between $3 and $10.
Your property value must be a little bit lower than mine.
Yes.
Actually, if I understand this right, though, the tax cap could be any number that, how do I explain this? If you have a lot of repairs, or you want to do this, you want to do that, and if the people vote for it, because I believe it could be 60% over, well, then your tax cap could go as high as 8, 9, 10%, whatever, am I right?
I would doubt it would ever go 8, 9, 10%.
Well, I doubt it would, I hope not. But I'm just saying that anything you really
There's-
want, if it's voted on, you could say you still met the tax cap.
Well, there are exclusions to the cap, which catch up in previous years. We don't think there's anything wrong with those particular exclusions. They were written into the law the first time the law was created. It creates a cap for us. The thing that you can't change is the cap. You can change the levy number if you want. The cap is a number that you cannot exceed. It's based on that particular calculation. The board could come up with a levy number that is different than the cap, but the cap is a solid number. Any other questions?
That's capital tax levy of 1.9 million. Now, is that based on an actual, our debt service?
So
That's a real number?
Yes, that's a solid number. If you take the expenses for debt service built into the $74 million proposal, and you take the state aid against it, the 1.9 is the difference. That includes all of our capital projects and all of our bus issues.
So like this $40 million we have outstanding,
Right.
that 1.9 million is our chunk.
Local
of the
share.
debt service.
Yes.
Local share.
Yeah, so that's where that number comes from. So it'll be, now starting next year, that number will go up because of the new project, or that won't get.
Part of the new project is on there already.
Oh, part of it is.
And if you, a little higher up on that slide, if you look at the 1.2 million, the difference between the 1.9 and 1.2 is why the cap is a little bit higher this year. In the subsequent calculation, the 1.9 million will replace the 1.2, and then the new exclusion won't be $700,000 difference.
There might be some variation year to
Yes.
year.
Yes, and every year there is a variation for a few reasons. Each one of those issues, the debt service isn't exactly like your house mortgage where it's exactly the same payment every year. It fluctuates on the bonds. Now, there's not a lot of fluctuation, but over the course of 3 or 4 issues, there's gonna be some.
I have a question. On the bus purchase plan, I'm not sure that it's accounting for the projected enrollment. It seems to me if we're gonna drop 350 students over the next 5 years, that we could drop 5 72 passenger buses from the plan.
I think that's a great question. We actually transport more than the enrolled students in Clarence, so I'm gonna let you take that one, Rick.
So we've probably got about 5,700 students that we transport. So, you know, some of the change in enrollment might be people going to a non-public or a Catholic school. We're still transporting them. And we've actually, the last few years, done as efficient job as we possibly can in combining. We take the runs to the north, to the east of our central schools and combine those runs. So we're trying to be as efficient as possible. A slight decrease in double tripping where we run all of our elementary runs and then our secondary runs. And you look at 300 students over the course of 4 or 5 or 6 years, that's half that number in any one run to begin with.
We did eliminate a bus on Clarence Center last year because the enrollment was down.
About 3 or 4 years ago, that 97 was 101. So the bus purchase plan, as you see where there's might be 12 vehicles this year, it goes to 9 and 8 in some subsequent years. And again, that plan is really every single year it gets revised and looked at. This is just today's best estimate of 10 years out.
And right now, too, we're playing catch-up for the 3 years that we did not purchase buses. So we're behind the 8 ball. In a few years down the road, we'll be to a point where we're gonna have a number of buses that are due to be replaced. And if we miss a year somewhere along the line again, that will put us 5 more big buses behind schedule. So we could encounter real problems at that point.
Kind of curious, so the number of buses that you need is less driven on the number of students, but more on the number of routes that you need? Is that a fair way to describe it?
Correct. We have a lot of out-of-district special ed, private parochial, homeless students. We have a lot of uses for the vehicles.
Yeah, I think that's an exact way to think of it. Show them some things.
He thinks 4.78% pass.
Well,
I'm a little bit worried about the public perception.
I'm hoping that we can educate our public that what that really translates to in real dollars for a home is nothing, given the fact that the governor's rebate still kicks in for this year.
It won't necessarily affect this year. I just worry about the perception. We're ready to go public and saying, which we are, but 4.78% and a million numbers for buses.
We're hopeful that our community will recognize our rationale. Response anything else?
Any other questions?
I guess I have to ask for clarification then. I guess I thought that the reason we got up to, that the district got up to 4.78% was because the capital tax levy, the purchase of the buses. Is that correct, or am I missing something? The 1.948.
You know, if you take that 4.7%, 1.5 of it is a town growth factor. 1.62% of it, which are already over 3% now, is a factor for the actual levy increase that New York State is allowing. And then the balance of it would be for all the capital projects and all the bus issues that we've had.
Just repeat what you said one more time, please.
look at our increase this year of 4.7, I would say it's got three main components. 1.5%, that's the top number, 1.015. 1.5% of the 4.7 is a town growth factor. 1.62% is New York State's cost of living, let's call it increase, saying that we know you need that much more.
Right.
The balance from the 1.5 and 1.62, which is 3.12, the difference is what the capital exclusions would be. All the capital projects we've had throughout the years that are still being paid off, and the buses.
Okay.
So the
That's
capital
pretty hefty
exclusions,
then.
the capital exclusions are the lowest of the three chunks that make up the levy number.
So we've gone from 4.5 now up to 4.78.
Well, actually, last year it was 3.2. Our original estimation before we knew anything about the governor was 4.5. We still know very little about the governor. We're taking some guesses. The 4.7 is still an estimate, but we think it's close. It could end up being a little bit lower, it could end up being a little bit higher. We need to get the number from the governor to make it 100% accurate.
Will the buses that you're proposing?
Yes. And remember, next year, the purchase of the buses that we have here does not affect at all the 2015-16 levy. It would affect the 5 years after that. Any other questions? Thank you.
Is there a link for people to submit questions?
Yes,
again?
yes. If you go to our website, on the left-hand navigation bar, second thing down is the 2015-16 button for the budget. You can find all of these presentations, you can find line items, you can find absentee ballot information. When we have everything figured out about who's running for the Board of Ed, we'll have that up there. And you can click the big envelope. The question will come directly to me. All of your questions go directly to the Board of Education along with an answer. Yes?
Is it possible to put the fact that there's a school board budget meeting on the, forgot to call it the, no, not the web. As you're driving by the high school.
The big sign in the high school?
Yeah.
We do it.
It's on there.
We do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
The sign isn't static, it doesn't say the same thing. Every few seconds, it'll
Oh.
rotate.
Oh.
It does have to say things about the high school, and then it'll flip over to the.
We'll have it on there at least a week.
No, it's their rotation.
Yes.
A week in advance, we'll have it on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then I need a motion to adjourn.
So
Second? Those in favor?